Undercover at a chaotic protest, I was hunting for a terrorist. Then a cop drew his gun on me, and suddenly I was the target. The air tasted like sweat and righteous anger. From my position near the edge of the protest, I had a clear view of both the chanting crowd and the stoic line of police officers in full riot gear. To anyone looking, I was just another college-aged kid in a gray hoodie and worn-out jeans, a face lost in a sea of thousands. That was the point. My backpack felt heavier than it was, not because of the water bottle and first aid kit inside, but because of the sensitive surveillance equipment nestled at the bottom. My mission wasn't to protest, it was to observe. We had intel that a domestic extremist cell was planning to use this peaceful demonstration as a cover to incite a riot, and my target was a man we only knew as the Agitator. For 2 hours I'd been tracking him, a nondescript man in a faded green jacket, moving through the crowd with a predator's grace, whispering in ears, pointing, creating little eddies of turbulence in the otherwise stable flow of people. I was close, so close to identifying his key lieutenants. My handler's voice was a ghost in my earbud. "Stay on him, Agent Thorne. Do not engage. Observe and report only." Standard procedure. The FBI doesn't kick down doors unless we know exactly what's behind them. Then everything went sideways. A sudden surge from the back of the crowd, a loud bang, probably a firecracker, but it sounded like a gunshot and panic erupted. The police line, which had been holding steady, began to advance. It was a classic kettle maneuver, designed to trap and contain. People scrambled, pushing and shoving. I was caught in the current, swept away from my target, and pinned against the cold brick wall of a closed bookstore. The Agitator was gone, swallowed by the chaos he'd helped create. Frustration burned in my gut, hot and sour. "Hey, you, on the wall." The voice was a bark, full of adrenaline and authority. I turned my head slowly. 2 officers had broken from the line, their faces obscured by helmets and visors. One was a bull-necked specimen, his chest puffed out like a rooster's. The other was wiry, hanging back slightly. Bullneck was the one who had shouted. He pointed his baton at me. "I'm just trying to get out of the way," I said, keeping my voice even, my hands visible and open at my sides. "De-escalation 101. Never look like a threat." "Looks to me like you were trying to spray paint this wall," he grunted, gesturing to a fresh red anarchy symbol a few feet down from me. It hadn't been there a minute ago. A setup. Classic. The Agitator's people were creating distractions, getting innocents arrested to bog down law enforcement. And I was the lucky winner. "That wasn't me, officer. I've just been standing here." "Yeah, that's what they all say," he sneered, stepping closer. The smell of cheap station house coffee and aggression radiated off him. He was enjoying this. "Let's see what's in the backpack. Probably got more paint in there, don't you? Or maybe a nice little brick to throw?" This was bad. My gear. If he found it, my cover was blown, the entire operation compromised. My handler's voice was silent. Protocol dictated radio silence if I was about to make contact with local LEOs. I was on my own. "It's just a water bottle and some snacks," I said, trying to project harmlessness. "I'm happy to show you, but can we please just step aside? I don't want to get trampled." He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You'll go where I tell you to go." He grabbed the front of my hoodie, balling the fabric in his fist and slamming me back against the brick. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and my head connected with the wall with a dull thud. Stars exploded behind my eyes for a second. "Hey, Rourke, easy," the wiry partner said, his voice holding a note of caution. "Shut up, Miller." "I got this," Rourke snarled, his face now inches from mine. I could see the sweat beading on his upper lip. "You little punks think you can run this city. You have no respect." My training kicked in, pushing past the pain. I catalogued his movements, his weight distribution, the way he held his baton. I assessed my options. I could take him down in 3 seconds, his partner in 5. But the consequences, a federal agent assaulting a police officer, even in self-defense, would be a jurisdictional nightmare. The operation would be toast. So I did what I was trained to do. I endured. I tried to de-escalate again. "Officer, please," I said, my voice strained. "There's no need for this." "I think there is," he said, and he let go of my hoodie only to shove me hard. I stumbled forward, catching my balance. When I turned back, he was holding his baton differently. Not as a deterrent, but as a weapon. He tapped it menacingly against his palm. The rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of hard plastic on leather cut through the noise of the riot. "Turn around, hands on the wall. Now." I hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. My mind was racing, calculating the odds, the fallout. Could I take a hit? A baton strike to the kidneys could incapacitate me for weeks. A strike to the head could be fatal. My mission was important, but it wasn't worth my life. My hesitation was all the justification he needed. Resisting, huh? I knew it. His eyes glinted behind his visor. "Guess you need a little persuasion." He raised the baton high. The wiry partner, Miller, took a half step forward and said, "Rourke, don't." But it was too late. Rourke was committed, a predator who had his prey cornered. He thought I was a scared, helpless girl. He thought the uniform and the weapon gave him all the power. He thought I would just stand there and take it. But he made one critical mistake. He underestimated me. As the baton began its downward arc, aimed right for my shoulder, the world seemed to slow down. I saw the flex of his wrist, the contempt in his eyes, the beginning of a cruel smile on his lips. My handler's voice faded. The mission faded. All that was left was years of training, muscle memory honed to a razor's edge, and the primal instinct to survive. My hand shot out, not to block, but to intercept. My fingers wrapped around his wrist, not the baton. Amateurs grab for the weapon, professionals target the user. My thumb found the pressure point over his radial nerve, and I squeezed hard. A jolt like electricity shot up his arm. His fingers spasmed open, his grunt of pain lost in the din of the crowd. The baton wasn't just released, it was ejected from his grip. In the same fluid motion, I used his forward momentum to spin him, throwing him off balance. He stumbled into the brick wall with a surprised "oof," his helmet scraping against the mortar. The black baton clattered onto the wet pavement between us. Silence stretched for a full 2 seconds, a pocket of stillness in the surrounding chaos. Rourke stared at his empty, tingling hand, then at me. The confusion in his eyes was rapidly being consumed by a furious, dark fire. Miller, the wiry partner, had his own baton out now, but he was frozen, looking from his partner to me, his stance uncertain. "What the hell?" he breathed. "I am not resisting," I said, my voice low and dangerously calm. Every fiber of my being screamed to identify myself, to flash the credentials tucked in my back pocket, and end this. But that would blow the operation wide open. The agitator and his cell would scatter to the winds. I couldn't. Not yet. "You need to back off. Now." Rourke seemed to shake himself out of his stupor. He saw my move not as self-defense but as an attack. To him, I had just gone from a mouthy protester to a trained, violent radical. "Assault on an officer!" he bellowed, his voice cracking with rage. "You're going down, bitch!" He lunged, abandoning any semblance of police procedure. It was a street fighter's wild haymaker, all power and no technique. I sidestepped easily, the punch whistling past my ear and connecting solidly with the brick wall. He roared in pain and frustration, shaking his now bruised knuckles. While he was recovering, Miller made his move. He came at me from the side, a textbook flanking maneuver. "Police, on the ground! Last warning!" he shouted. He was following his training, but he was hesitant. I could see it in the way he held his baton, in the slight waver of his advance. He was a follower, caught in the wake of his partner's aggression. I had to neutralize him quickly and cleanly. No permanent damage. As he swung his baton in a low arc at my legs, I dropped my center of gravity, sweeping my own leg out and hooking his ankle. At the same time, I brought my forearm up to deflect his strike, guiding the baton past my body. His own momentum did the rest. He tumbled over my outstretched leg, landing hard on his back. The air rushed out of his lungs in a pained gasp, and his helmeted head bounced once on the asphalt. He wasn't unconscious, but he was out of the fight for the next 30 seconds. One down. I spun back to face Rourke just as he was charging again, this time with his head down like a bull. It was pure, undisciplined rage. I didn't have time for fancy joint locks or takedowns. I met his charge with a simple, brutal stop kick to the sternum. My boot connected with the center of his body armor, right below the throat. It wasn't enough to break through the vest, but the kinetic energy transfer was immense. He stopped dead, gagging for air that wouldn't come. He staggered backward, his face a mask of shock and pain, his hands clutching his chest. I had disarmed one officer and incapacitated two in less than 10 seconds. The adrenaline was a cold fire in my veins. This was a disaster. Passers-by were starting to notice, their cell phones coming out to record the small-framed girl in the hoodie who was single-handedly fighting off 2 cops in riot gear. This footage would go viral, and my face would be plastered everywhere. My career, my life as I knew it, was imploding with every passing second. "Just stay down," I said, my voice pleading now. "It's over." But for men like Rourke, it's never over when their pride is on the line. He looked at Miller, groaning on the ground. He looked at me, standing my ground, not even breathing hard. The fury in his eyes curdled into something colder, something far more dangerous. The last vestiges of his professional restraint crumbled to dust. He took another step back, creating distance. His right hand, no longer reaching for a baton or forming a fist, dropped to his hip. I saw the deliberate movement, the practiced dip of his fingers, the sound, a sharp click-clack, as the retention hood on his holster was thumbed open, was louder than any gunshot in the world. His eyes locked onto mine, promising murder. "You're done," he rasped, his hand closing around the checkered grip of his service pistol. My world narrowed to a single point, the dark, unforgiving shape of the pistol grip in his hand. The Academy teaches you that a sidearm is a line that, once crossed, changes everything. It elevates a physical confrontation into a lethal force encounter. There's no de-escalation from a drawn gun, only survival. My handler's voice screamed in my memory, "Do not engage local LEOs. Abort if compromised." But there was no aborting this. He wasn't a cop anymore. He was a man with a weapon who intended to use it on me. Time dilated, stretching each microsecond into an eternity. I saw the muscles in his forearm tense as he began to draw the weapon. 21 feet. That's the rule. An attacker with a blade can close a 21-foot gap before an officer can draw their weapon and fire. I was less than 10 feet away. I didn't have a blade. I had 4 years of intensive CQC training at Quantico. Before the barrel of his gun could even clear the holster, I moved. It wasn't a conscious thought. It was pure, unadulterated instinct. I exploded forward, covering the distance between us in 2 powerful strides. My left hand shot out and clamped down over his, pinning the gun in its holster, my thumb jamming itself between the hammer and the frame. He couldn't fire. He couldn't even finish the draw. His eyes widened in disbelief, a flicker of fear finally breaking through the rage. He was strong, but I had leverage and a deeper understanding of biomechanics. My right hand came up, not as a fist, but with my fingers rigid, like a spear. I drove the tip of my fingers into the pressure point just below his ear, at the hinge of his jaw. It's a nerve cluster, a spot that sends a blinding, paralytic shockwave through the body. His whole frame seized up, his jaw went slack, and a guttural, half-strangled cry escaped his lips. His grip on his pistol loosened for a critical half-second. That's all I needed. I ripped the gun from his hand, twisting it away from him. In one smooth, practiced motion, I stepped back, ejected the magazine, and racked the slide to clear the chamber. The live round spun through the air, glinting under the chaotic streetlights before disappearing into the grime of the gutter. I let the empty magazine clatter to the ground next to the baton. Then I tossed the now useless pistol a dozen feet away, where it slid to a stop near an overflowing trash can. The entire sequence, from his hand touching his gun to the weapon being rendered safe, took maybe 3 seconds. Rourke stumbled back against the wall, clutching his jaw, his face a grotesque canvas of disbelief, pain, and humiliation. Miller was pushing himself up onto his elbows, his helmet askew, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. He saw his partner's baton on the ground, his own lying nearby. He saw his partner's empty holster and the dismantled firearm clear across the alley. He looked at me, This unassuming girl in a hoodie who had systematically and efficiently taken apart 2 armed police officers without throwing a single punch. The equation wasn't computing. Who are you?" Miller stammered, the fight completely gone from him. That was the question, wasn't it? The one I couldn't answer. I could feel the eyes on us, the cell phone still recording. I had maybe 30 seconds before more officers arrived, drawn by the commotion. My mission was a smoking ruin. My career was likely over. The best I could hope for was to get out of this without getting shot for real. My objective shifted. It was no longer about surveillance. It was about extraction. I needed to disappear before I was identified, before the situation escalated any further. I took a half step back, getting ready to blend into the fleeing protesters. But Rourke wasn't done. Humiliation had replaced his rage with a venomous, desperate resolve. "She's got a weapon," he screamed, his voice raw. "She took my gun. Shots fired. Officer down." He was lying. A blatant, desperate lie to justify his impending actions. He unclipped his radio from his shoulder strap with a shaking hand. "Officer down. Shots fired. Corner of 4th and Elm. Suspect is a white female, gray hoodie. She's armed and—" I couldn't let him finish that transmission. That call would turn me from a person of interest into a cop killer in the eyes of every officer responding. It was a death sentence. I sprinted toward him. He saw me coming and tried to shield the radio, turning his body. I didn't go for him. I went for the radio. I slapped the transmit button off with the heel of my hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. At the same time, I noticed something clipped to the front of his vest, something I hadn't seen in the heat of the moment. A small black rectangle with a blinking red light. A body camera. It had seen everything. It had recorded him initiating the contact. It had recorded him raising the baton. It had recorded me disarming him, not attacking him. And it had recorded him drawing his weapon on me. But it had also recorded my face, clear as day. My blood ran cold. That footage was my conviction and my exoneration, all in one. If it got back to the station and was logged as evidence, it would be buried in a mountain of paperwork. But Rourke, in his current state, could easily lose it. He could claim it malfunction. He could destroy the only thing that proved I acted in self-defense. He saw where I was looking. A new kind of panic dawned on his face. He fumbled with the clip, trying to shield the camera with his hand. "Get away from me!" It was now or never. I reached out, my fingers closing around the camera's housing. He shoved me back and we grappled for a moment, a desperate, clumsy dance. My backpack swung around, its weight throwing me off balance. As I stumbled, the main zipper, which must have been partially undone, gave way completely. The contents of my bag spilled out onto the pavement. A water bottle, a protein bar, a small first aid kit. And, sitting right on top, its black casing and silver emblem unmistakable in the flickering streetlights, was my FBI-issue satellite phone, and next to it, my credentials wallet, which had flipped open in the fall. The golden eagle of the Department of Justice seal seemed to glow. The world, which had been a cacophony of sirens, shouts, and my own thundering pulse, suddenly went dead silent. It felt like a vacuum had opened up in that grimy alley. Miller, who had just gotten to his knees, froze mid-motion, his gaze locked on the wallet. Rourke, whose hand was still protectively covering his body cam, slowly lowered it, his eyes tracing a path from the spilled gear back to my face. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture so horrifyingly out of context that his brain could barely process it. The calculated efficiency of my movements, my refusal to strike, the precise way I disarmed and dismantled him, it all made a terrifying new kind of sense. His face, already pale, turned the color of ash. The bravado, the rage, the righteous fury, it all evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, gut-wrenching dread. "Oh no," he whispered, the words barely audible. It wasn't an apology. It was a eulogy for his career. I didn't say a word. I calmly knelt down, ignoring the distant approaching sirens that were now screaming my name, the one on the false charges he'd just broadcast. I picked up my credentials, the leather cool against my skin, and tucked them securely back into my bag, along with the sat phone. I zipped the backpack closed and slung it over my shoulder, my movements deliberate and unhurried. I was back in control. The power dynamic in that alley had shifted so completely it was almost a physical force. I stood up and looked Rourke dead in the eye. "You had this," I said, tapping the body camera still clipped to his vest. "This recorded everything. You initiating an unjustified physical altercation. You escalating to lethal force against an unarmed civilian. And you making a false officer down call. That's at minimum 3 felonies, Officer Rourke, not to mention the departmental violations." He flinched as if I'd struck him. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing to say. He was caught. Miller finally found his voice. We didn't know," he stammered, scrambling to his feet. "We thought you were one of the rioters. Rourke, you gotta tell them." "Tell them what, Miller?" I cut him off, my voice like ice. "That you stood by while your partner assaulted an unarmed woman. That you did nothing when he drew his weapon on her. Insubordination is one thing. Being an accessory to aggravated assault and attempted murder is another, especially when the victim is a federal agent on active duty." Miller's face crumpled. The full weight of the situation was crushing him. These weren't charges that would get him a suspension or a desk job. This was the kind of incident that ended careers, led to prison time, and made national news. The wail of sirens was deafening now. 2 squad cars screeched to a halt at the mouth of the alley, their lights painting the scene in frantic strobes of red and blue. 4 officers spilled out, guns drawn, taking cover behind their doors. "Police, show me your hands. Drop the weapon," one of them yelled. Rourke and Miller instinctively raised their hands, a pathetic and ironic gesture. I, however, did not. I kept my hands at my sides. I was done being treated like a criminal. "Stand down, officers," I commanded, my voice cutting through the noise with an authority they weren't expecting. "This is a federal crime scene." They hesitated, confused. I wasn't wearing a uniform. I was just a girl in a hoodie. But the tone of my voice, the way I held myself, gave them pause. I reached into my back pocket, moving slowly and deliberately. "I am Special Agent Thorne, FBI," I announced, pulling out my actual credentials this time, the ones I always carry separate from my gear. I held up the badge and ID. "This situation is under federal jurisdiction now. Holster your weapons." One of the arriving officers, a sergeant with gray at his temples, squinted, then lowered his gun. "Federal agent? What the hell is going on here?" Before I could answer, a black sedan with no markings screeched up behind the squad cars. The passenger door flew open, and a man in a sharp suit, my handler, Agent Davies, stepped out. He had my earbud in, and his face was grim. He'd heard enough to know the operation was shot, and I was in deep. He strode into the alley, flashing his own credentials to the stunned officers. "Sergeant, my agent is secure. Your men," he said, nodding toward Rourke and Miller, "are being detained for assaulting a federal officer. I want them placed in cuffs, and I want their firearms, batons, and body cameras secured as evidence. Immediately." The sergeant looked from Davies to Rourke and Miller, whose faces were monuments to utter despair, and then back to me. He understood. Without a word, he and another officer moved in, taking the 2 disgraced cops into custody. Rourke didn't resist. As the cuffs clicked shut around his wrists, he finally met my gaze again. There was no anger left, only a profound and terrifying understanding of how badly he had screwed up. Davies walked over to me, his eyes scanning me for injuries. "You okay, Thorne?" "I'm fine," I said, the adrenaline finally starting to recede, leaving a deep, bone-weary exhaustion in its place. "The primary target got away. The operation's a bust." "We'll get him another day," Davies said, his voice softening slightly. "Today, you just survived. The director has already been briefed. The U.S. Attorney's Office is taking the case. This will be handled at the highest levels." He glanced at the body cam being carefully removed from Rourke's vest and placed in an evidence bag. "Good work securing that. It's all the proof we'll ever need." As they led Rourke and Miller away, I felt a strange sense of emptiness. There was no victory here. A mission had failed. 2 men's lives were effectively over, destroyed by their own arrogance and aggression. And I was left with the chilling memory of a gun being drawn, a line being crossed. I had won the fight, but the battle had left its scars. I looked out at the protest, now being peacefully dispersed. They were fighting for justice, for accountability. In a twisted, violent way, in a dark alley against two of their own. That's exactly what had just been delivered.